All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Printavo University. I am Nick. I'm on the sales team over at Printavo, and I'm so excited to see everybody here today. I see people already introducing themselves in the chat. We love that. We love it when you tell us where you're watching from. We see Richard in Detroit. What up, Richard? Glad you're back. We see Mark out in Anaheim. All right, Nick out in Chicago. Love another Nick from Chicago. Super excited to talk today. We're going to be talking about hiring and getting new people in your shop. And we have an amazing guest. I can't wait to introduce him. I'm going to introduce Matt, and then he can introduce our guest, my co-host here, Matt Marcotte over on Printavo's customer success team. Matt, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Can't complain. I'm stoked for today's chat. We got the great folks at Flash Flood Print. We're going to learn about how they go through their process of hiring and having good people on their team. Throughout COVID, what they've done to band behind their city and their shop to keep things going forward, I think they're a good model of success of what people should be looking for when it comes to how to get quality folks and keep them around. So I'm super excited about this. So without any further ado, our guest, Flash Flood Print. How's it going, ladies?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Appreciate it. You want to give us your little intro? Let us know who each of you are and give us a quick little synopsis to let everybody know who is Flash Flood Print.
I'm May. I'm one of the owners here at Flash Flood, and this is Krista.
Hi, I'm Krista. I am the production manager at Flash Flood Print Studios.
And fun fact, she tie-dyed that mask herself.
I did.
Legitimately. Love it. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited to have you today.
Yeah, we're super pumped to be here.
Cool.
Absolutely. So, it's interesting. We were chatting just ambiently over email before, and May, I think it was May, you mentioned that there was a process you had developed for hiring. And that is so interesting. And before we even talk about the process, I'm wondering, how did you realize that hiring needed to become a system? How did you realize that a process was needed for this task?
So obviously, when I started the business, I had never hired anybody. It was kind of like me and my business partner started real small in a garage, and then have just been, over the years adding team members. And the hiring process was always something that I kind of stumbled through and didn't find myself really enjoying or having a good time doing. But as a growing shop, we're obviously going to need to keep hiring more and more people. So it became obvious to me that we needed to develop some sort of process to make the whole interviewing, training, that whole aspect of owning a business a little bit easier and a little bit more systematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we go, each time we are learning so much from every single new hire.
For sure.
That developing this system kind of just happened naturally because it was us kind of saying hey, what did we learn from that last process? How can we continue to apply that the next time?
What did we wish that we had done, or questions that we had asked that we didn't this time? And then let's put them into the next process.
Yeah.
That's so smart. I know that even in my experience with doing hiring and interviews and working with shops doing hiring interviews, a lot of times it's kind of the Wild West. You're oh yeah, come on in. And maybe you've got a couple of core questions you want to ask them, but you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. I think that a lot more shops would think about, okay, it is a system. You have to first qualify them as a competent person, right? Somebody that's going to actually lend well to the culture. A little reference to our last Printavo University, right? Lend to the culture, and also can fit the needs that they're being asked. So I'm actually kind of shocked. I never really thought about a process. I've thought about questions. I think a lot of people do that too. They think about what are some good questions to ask during an interview, but they don't really think about the actual hiring process enough. Onboarding, that's something people often think about, that onboarding process, right? But the actual process itself about interviewing and hiring, I think it's a really intelligent way to look at that, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more. So with that, you already dropped some things in there, making mistakes and kind of going from those mistakes, right? So in the last one, we learned something. How do we go to the next one? What are some of those mistakes that you made along the way, maybe early on or even later on, that you are at least willing to share with us?
Totally. I have one big mistake that I always tell people about, and it's super obvious. It's don't hire your friends. It works out such a small percentage of the time. I feel like Krista is probably like the prime example where it actually worked, but everybody thinks they're the exception to the rule, that they know their friends so well that this is going to work out fine. And, best case scenario, you learn some things about your friend that you don't want to know. Worst scenario, you lose a friend. So
Yeah.
it's kind of that obvious thing that you feel like is going to be a really easy step to just be like, hey, I know this person. It's going to be such a great transition, but in the end, it actually makes things so much harder.
Yeah, and I think the misconception around hiring friends is that, like, hey, I have a close relationship with this person, and training them and teaching them and having like an open and honest dialogue with them is going to be natural and easy. In reality, I feel like it tends to be the exact opposite, where you get into a situation and being like, hey, listen, this is just business at this point, and like, we've got to talk about your performance, whatever. Those conversations can get really difficult when you've got a personal relationship with them as well. And then we really try to make sure that we're keeping like a pretty strong work-life balance here. And when you get into those situations, that makes that more difficult too, because naturally when you're hanging out as friends, you start talking about work, and then it kind of like everything just gets a little too, So it's those distinctions have been important for us to make.
I can admit that I am guilty of that one as well. In years back when I was running a large shop, and I was in my early 20s. I just got out of college, and I had some buddies that were looking to move from Central Illinois up toward Chicagoland. I was like, oh, hey, we're always hiring. Let's go ahead and get you jobs. Oh, also, I need roommates, right? So I made the massive mistake of hiring two of my like total dunderhead friends, right? And living with them, it was like a bad episode of Workaholics. Like I had to like, and like we're in our early 20s, so of course the weekends might involve like having a beer, going out for a drink, and like being goofballs. And then Monday morning, I'm like driving all of us to work, and they're like sluggish and not doing anything. I'm like, come on, guys. And then like doing reviews, there's like, shut up, Matt. And you're like, okay, I can't do this. So I can definitely see that. Hope I remain friends with one of those two, so that's at least good. But I think you're absolutely right. Hiring friends, it's a weird duality of like friendship and business. And for some people, it's easy to be like, hey, I'm sorry, this is business. We've got to put that friendship aside. But for most people, I don't think it's that simple to do that. And a friendship is more important than a business partnership, I feel. So I blame myself for losing that friend in that instance, which is a bummer. But I think that's a very legitimate point. Hopefully, you were able to maintain friendship and you didn't lose anybody there. But
I was able to maintain some of those friendships, but there are sadly a couple that have also been lost to my mistakes too. So it's a hard lesson to learn, but once you learn it, I feel like you never forget.
Yeah, because it's
Steve,
you want to be able to like help out your friends, and you've got an opportunity, so you naturally want to be like, hey, let's try to make this work, but we've come to realize it's not worth it.
Yeah, Steve from Printavo, he's got a good comment here. He said, you can't be a boss and a friend, but your real friends won't make you choose.
That's a great point.
Interesting in theory, hard to live on. But I do like that. So hiring friends, that's one big mistake that I think we can all agree, like, that's tread lightly on that ice. What other mistakes do you think you've made along the way that we could all learn from?
Early on, not having like a formal interview, or like not interviewing multiple people for a role has kind of been a bad choice. I think early on I wanted to avoid the interview in the first place because it's hard to interview somebody, but then I also thought it seemed like really stuffy, and we weren't trying to be this like super formal shop. It was like a DIY thing, and we wanted to kind of be more casual. But again, like, you learn so much about somebody from an interview, and it's so stupid simple. Like, just ask the questions, write it down. I feel has also been kind of a mistake where we've obviously like interviewing is a normal thing that we do now.
Yeah, it's necessary. I mean, even if you think you know everything there is to know about a person and you're like, they're going to be great, they've done this before. That might all be true, but maybe they don't fit in with us, fit in with our culture, fit in with our core values, you know. So those interviews are crucial. They have to happen.
Sometimes you learn something about someone where you're like, oh, I wish I knew that beforehand.
Yeah.
Totally. So before I jumped into work with Printavo here, I was running production at a shop here in Chicagoland. Great shop, still friends with everybody over there. Second City Prints. They had, so with COVID, there was some weird hiring that had to happen, right? And one thing that we kind of figured out in that process was that we were trying to do a lot of like higher end management, right? So like a department manager. So we're not just looking locally, we're looking really across the country for somebody to fit that. Well, we figured out that you can't just rely on a Zoom call, right? So we were doing like 2 to 3 Zoom call interviews and feeling really solid about it. And then you hire them, they fly out, they relocate. And then once you have that first in person, you're like, ooh, it's a weird vibe. I don't like it. I didn't pick up, right? And it ended up being a couple months of like dealing with a weird vibe before being like, sorry, it's not going to work out. And then now you like relocated somebody. It's a whole big thing. So one thing that we came up with is do like 2 to 3. And if they don't live locally and think about relocating, spend the money and fly them out and make sure that it actually is a good vibe. Because anybody can be good like this, right? It's, you put them in a room, you put them around people, and you try to actually like see how they are, then it can be very, very different. So I was wondering if you had seen that, like, especially now with COVID, had you done anything like virtual interviews and then had to turn around and be like, okay, let's actually do it in person now to verify that?
We have been fairly, I guess, lucky in that most of our people are just coming from the local area. So we've had mostly in-person interviews, but that does bring up such an interesting point, like just having to adapt the interview process for our current climate has been a really strange like turn of events.
Yeah, but I will say I do feel like it's made our process stronger. I think it's made us better interviewers.
Yeah.
Because you have to be more clear. You have to be, you know, you've got to have a plan of attack before you get into the interview, and be really intentional with that whole process, since everybody is either communicating over Zoom or, you know, we're trying to limit the amount of interaction in general.
Sure.
So making sure we're like really paying attention to the early part of the process so that we're not bringing people in to interview that like are not going to be a good fit. And we know that, you know?
Yeah. One of the things that we actually did with one of our last hires, we hired a sales rep, and using COVID kind of as an excuse, we had them do a written interview first, which was really beneficial for that particular role because we were looking for somebody who was a really good communicator through email and through the written word. So it was kind of like that first initial test of how well does this person respond to these questions? Can they write a professional email? Like, is this the tone of voice that we're looking for? And that actually helped a ton.
Yeah. And it also, like she said, it gave us kind of a look into how they would handle communication with clients, which was really what we were going after. But then their responses to that email and those questions in that email is what informed the questions that we asked once we got them in person. So all of that kind of like fed into itself. I really enjoyed it. Now I feel like that's something we're going to continue moving forward. But we wouldn't have probably gotten to that point if it weren't for the current circumstances, you know?
For sure. You know, Krista, you mentioned something a few minutes ago that I think we should talk about in depth. You mentioned how core values for your company also show who to hire and help with this process. Can you talk more about that? And maybe in particular, just tell us, how did you develop your company's core values?
Yeah.
I'm gonna let May do that one. This one's on her.
For sure. So I've been reading a lot of business books. Didn't have a business background, so it's kind of like playing a lot of catch up. Like as we've been growing through the company. One of the books that we really enjoy here is Traction by Gina Wickman. And that one, they really emphasize core values being an important part of your business and kind of what drives the ship, essentially. So it seems really frou-frou or kind of corporate to have core values developed as a small business, but it's really helped us kind of figure out like what we're about, and it has informed every other decision after that, like from who we hire to kind of what our culture is like. They're super important. They're core values.
Yeah, it also, like, this is a bit of a tangent outside of the hiring process, but having the core values has also helped us in our sales and marketing tactics, because we want our clients to also closely align with our core values as well. So it's something that has been super informative internally, but also externally. So it's become this very cyclical thing that, like, again, it's all coming back to the core values.
I love that. I think that not enough shops do that. And not only just talk about, okay, who we hiring, do they match our core values, but also when you hit an impasse, right? Maybe an impasse is an upset customer, and you have to look at the validity of why they're upset, and then you have to actually go against, okay, here's my opinions are, but what is our core value? What is our mission? And how should the business handle it? Maybe how I want to handle it's one thing, but the values that we've built our pillars of success on as a company, that's really holding the company up. What do those pillars say we should do with this customer? And I think that always makes a decision so much easier to pull yourself out of that and go with, okay, what is our core value and what are we going to do with this? And it makes it much cleaner to be able to pull your emotions and thoughts out of that process and go, well, this is what we have to do, right? And be able to make more informed decisions without being stuck at an impasse too long. It's like a fork in the road, and your core value is the sign saying that's the way you have to go. There's no questions here. I think it's really, really important. Thinking on that though, go ahead.
Sorry. It allows for more consistency too, because now that we know we've got this roadmap, essentially, of how we expect ourselves to behave and what values we're looking for in our employees and in our clients. We've got that established. So like you said, we're able to use that to help us guide decision making.
Yeah, each new employee that we have here gets like essentially a little like company culture like booklet, and the core values are like the first page on there. So they know it from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's something you ever need to audit? Like, do you feel like your core values are so strong that they are just going to stay consistent? Or do you feel like it's an auditable process that you need to actually go back and recheck and make sure that it's still holding true and that you've held true to them as well? Or is it kind of like a set it and hold by it? Or do you find you have to revisit and adjust?
I would be definitely open to changing and evolving core values, but right now ours, I feel, are still applicable, and that we feel fairly strongly that they represent who we are now and who we want to be for like the next few years. But you know, people change, businesses change. I think it's only natural to evolve those values as you change.
Yeah, I think maybe it's like an annual or biannual revisiting of that, because as we, like, you know, working towards long-term plans, even as we're doing those long-term business plans, a lot of times it comes back to the core value. And so I think it's natural for us to question that and making sure that we're still aligning with all of that over time as well.
Yeah, love it. Evolve with the business. I love it.
Yes. So with that in mind, with the core values as one of the sort of, you know, North Stars for hiring, how do you know when to hire a person in a way? Like, how do you know what roles you need? And when you do identify that need, what do you do next?
That's a great question. So recently we have, one of the positions we hired recently was due to that position becoming becoming vacant. So we were able to hire for that position, but in doing so, through that interview process, we actually fell in love with another one of the candidates as well. And we determined that we found another hole within our system that we felt they would be a perfect fit for. So we ended up developing a role for them. So that's kind of I would say abnormal, but that was definitely something that, like, as we were going through the process, we were so torn and so in love with both of these candidates and felt like we needed to, we also had this other need that wasn't being addressed. So it was perfect to be able to get that person into that position. But a lot of times I think it comes down to like reassessing our current studio efficiencies and bottlenecks and where within our current process are we having a hang up or something that, maybe one person's current role has too many duties on their task list and it's no longer becoming sustainable. So maybe positions need to be more refined and then separated into two positions. I think those are the conversations that we end up having a lot of times.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious whenever you're running the shop, whenever areas are getting like overwhelmed, where it's like, okay, we really need to address this problem because it's affecting other people in the company. So that seems like a pretty obvious choice to be able to like make that leap into making it into an official position.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm super intrigued. What something you just said, Krista, is you were hiring for another position. So it sounds like somebody left or may have been terminated, right? So that's one way you see you have a need, right? A hole opens up and you need to fill that hole. So it sounded like you were in that process of filling that hole and you found two to fit that hole. Yeah. But you only had one hole to fit. But the thing is that you saw the value in both those individuals that you said, you know what, there's enough value here. There's enough things that we need that it is still absolutely worth it to go. Instead of hiring one, we're going to hire two and we're going to fill that hole we have. And we're going to use the other person that has so much value. So that really intrigues me because a lot of times people say, you know what, this person's really quality. We just don't have a need for them right now. And I think your approach of, oh, there's plenty of needs always. And this person is so rock solid that we see the value in them to develop what their needs actually are going to be and use them to fill that hole. That is such a proactive way of thinking about hiring in your business, to let the naturalness of it evolve the business and be stronger, not be so hung up on, well, I'm sorry, I only have space for one. Fight to the death, right? It's way more. I mean, that's a good way to do it too, right? But I really like the proactiveness and the openness to say, like, we liked them both. We had to have them both. I'm curious, from that hiring instance of having both those people, how did that grow? Was it end up being like, hey, perfect, both of them are amazing, and we're glad we did that? Or was there any residual like?
So far, so good. Everything's going pretty well right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and it was something I will say. Was this new position that we created was something that we had discussed previously as a long-term need, but we didn't necessarily anticipate it happening so quickly. It was more in our like next year, our goal is to hire somebody for this position. But it just happened so naturally.
And I think we're always trying to look for the right seat for the right person. And it just made so much sense for us to like put this person here. So
love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I guess there is the scarcity of finding the right person for the role when you need it is difficult. So planning ahead, it sounds like if you have sort of a multi-year roadmap, that can make the hiring process for today easier, but obviously for the multi-years down the line. But planning ahead is be a really useful thing shops could do. With that, someone asked us in the chat, and they asked, where do you post the help wanted ads? But maybe to broaden that question, once you've identified a need, once you know you want to hire a person, how do you start getting that solicitation out there? And how do you start filtering through the flack and knowing who's the who start interviewing?
So I think we're an extreme outlier in that we have only ever posted jobs on Instagram. Out of all of the social media accounts, like we, exactly. That shock is what I expected to hear. I feel have developed a pretty core following on Instagram. It's the one that we interact with the most, and I had a weird trial run where I posted a job to Facebook, and it like put me on this like Facebook job board, and we just got the weirdest applicants who were just looking for any job ever. So I'm not going to do that again. I think it's kind of like we've stuck with it because if it's not broken, like why fix it? So we've just been kind of going down that path.
Yeah, I mean, most of our Instagram, I do feel like we've been able to establish like a pretty intimate connection with our community that way. And in, the Tulsa art community is pretty close knit to begin with. And all of our team members are artists in their individual life as well. And so that's not necessarily a prerequisite, but it's something that we really are very attracted to. And so being able to post specifically on Instagram and have the audience already know that and appreciate that about us, it just is like a really natural way to get straight to the audience that we know we're going to be interested in anyways.
I like that. And that actually, I mean, it was surprising that that's your main go-to is Instagram, but at the same time, like I've seen your Instagram, it makes sense. And having that art background, I'm actually a little curious, is in your values, somewhere in your values, a heart of creativity? Do you have that as like one of your values in which like you not only seek that in people, but you encourage that artistic creative side? Is that one of your core values? And it makes sense that it would be.
Our top core value that we are artists, and that means artists in kind of like the general sense too, just as creative problem solvers, people that appreciate the mediums that they work in, just having that mindset of being like maybe a little weird, a little off sometimes, but I think we all work together really well because we come from that same background where we appreciate the medium.
Exactly. And I feel like we all have a more unique approach to problem solving specifically because of that art background that all of us have. And it's not all like everybody's a painter or something, like we have a bunch of different, we have musicians and photographers. It just is like a pretty diverse panel of that like arts community, so you get a really unique set of ideas that way.
I really like that. I've always told people that there's not enough validity led to a screen printer is an artist, right? Maybe they're not making the initial design, but they're putting ink to substrate, and how they go about those processes and variables will adjust the outcome of that piece of art. So even though they're not the mind's eye behind the design, they are the actual artisan that is making that tangible. I know this is a little off the radar, but I'm curious though, encouraging and creating such an amazing, I love it, artistic mentality in the shop. I've had a lot of artsy friends. I've dabbled in the artsy world myself. That also can come with a whole lot of ego, and it can also come with a whole lot of very strong opinions. So I'm just curious, has that ever flared up as an issue for you folks? Or again, is it something that you nurture it so well that you haven't really had that come up?
I don't feel like we've had it come up in like a really problematic way. Like sometimes we'll look at designs, and being artists, like we'll all kind of offer our critique on designs that come through. And like, I feel like that's natural anyway in a print shop. Like, who's not looking at these designs to come through? But I think in general, we try to find people that are not that egotistical, like throughout the interviewing process. So hopefully that generally gets taken care of pretty early on.
Yeah, and one of our other core values is that we are collaborators. And so I feel like that just happens.
It kind of negates the whole ego thing whenever you're conscious that you're working as a part of a team and that you strive to be a part of that team. So I think that helps us balance.
Yes. And we ask a lot of questions about candidates' collaborative process and how they work with a team and like what their problem solving techniques are like. And we reiterate quite often in the interview process that it is a very collaborative environment. and that we expect our teammates to be able to work within that collaboration process pretty smoothly. So we don't get a lot of the like, this is the only way we're going to go,
Right.
and you kind of got to get on board, So I feel like that's helpful.
Yeah.
Totally.
I love it.
Jump in real quick. What are some of those questions in particular? You mentioned some of the questions for problem solving and problem solving and collaboration. What are some of those questions that help you tease that information out?
I think one of my favorite questions is always to ask what their experience is like working as a part of the team, and what positives they got out of it, and then what negatives they got out of it. And whenever people answer candidly, you learn a lot about how they fit within that team structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we also ask a lot of questions that are geared towards, their specific background. If they've worked in a specific industry or a restaurant we know of or whatever, we're able to kind of ask about an instance that maybe happened at that specific job where they could have come across a challenge, and how did they handle that? How were they able to, smooth the situation and make it the best experience for like the team as well as the client. So yeah, we ask a lot of those types of questions.
I think also in interviewing, we always end up defining the roles and responsibilities for that particular position. And then it's a matter of kind of taking the specific information that they've given us, like through their resume, or like maybe we had that written interview, and trying to find the little like niches that we can go through and like try to apply it to the roles and responsibilities that we're trying to hire for.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's a key part then that I was also going to ask about, and you already just nailed that one. You actually define the job, you define the role, and you have a clear laid out expectation of what that role is. It's crazy to me how many shops are, well, you're a press operator, you operate the press. Okay, well, what are there expectations there? What do I have to do when I'm not operating the press? Am I supposed to be doing something else? Right. So how detailed do you get with your job roles? And when you are hiring, so for example, you had that one spot, you found 2 candidates that are perfect. So do you take these candidates and say, okay, this is what the job role is, but this is who you are. Let's actually adjust this a little bit to make sure that it is a better fit for you? Or do they have to fit into what you've already predefined, predestined as that role?
I think it depends a lot on the person that we're interviewing, because we've definitely had people that we've interviewed before where they interviewed for a specific position and they essentially got it, but we kind of tweaked that position a little bit to like better fit their skill set. So like maybe they do screen room half of the time, and the other half of the time they're like training to separate films because they have a design background and they're really interested in that aspect of the shop. One of the things that we actually do fairly regularly every year is I send out a survey to all of our team members. And within that survey, like I've listed all the different aspects of the shop, and they rate them, their interest in those areas, like from 1 to 5. And if we find that somebody's like finding more interest in a different area, or like they maybe just want to grow out of where they are, like then we start to like shift them into a different role.
Yeah, and that interview or questionnaire process has been super telling because, sometimes you can tell from a day-to-day basis that maybe somebody isn't super passionate about a specific aspect of their role, but they do it anyways. But they might not feel comfortable to just directly say, like, listen, I don't really want to do this one thing anymore because it has been delivered to them as an expectation. So this questionnaire is somewhere that they can feel pretty safe about being like, yeah, I kind of hate doing receiving. Like maybe I could work on learning to mix inks or something like that instead, So it's helped us in, like she said, like guiding people through kind of graduating into new roles. And also, sometimes that's when you find out that you've got another position open.
Yeah. So I love what you said. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper just because I'm enamored with your responses so far. So this questionnaire, genius also, help get a baseline for how people feel about their department, what they're doing. So you brought something up, right? Maybe they don't like to do receiving, right? So in my experience, people usually don't like to do receiving and reclaiming. So what happens if you do this and you find that maybe the person you have in either department hates it, but nobody else shows any interest in doing that? What do you do when you come to that impasse? I mean, you have to have somebody there. Is that the time where you kind of pull them aside and say, hey, look, we're going to move you, but we have to bring somebody else in and you train in that department? Or what do you do in that instance?
I think we're lucky in that we haven't had anything like that come up yet. Mm-hmm. But what you said is pretty akin to what I would do in that scenario, where we want people to be happy in their roles here. And whenever that happens where people are unhappy, it makes it difficult for them to do their job correctly. So we're definitely open to moving them into a different role, but it might take some time.
Gotcha. So it's all about transparency and letting them know, like, hey, we understand that this is not where you want to be. We don't want to keep you here if you don't want to be here. So let's figure out a way to move you. Let's work together. I think that's huge. I think that's really important as a survey to do.
Part of all of this is just being able to have like an honest conversation with your team about where they want to be and where we can put them.
Well,
I love it.
Speaking of honest conversations, maybe the first honest conversation you have with the person is the actual interview. And May, going back a couple steps earlier in our talk, you were saying that there were a few candidates who you didn't even do the formal interview for. And then maybe in that shift, actually doing the interview, asking the questions helped immensely. So what are you guys looking for in that interview how long is the interview, and what are you guys doing and looking for during that length of time?
So generally, whenever we're interviewing somebody, we tend to let the interviewee kind of define how long that goes. Generally, I like to have the flow of conversation remain pretty natural there. So whenever you really click with somebody and they have one of those interviews where you're just talking for an hour and it feels like 20 minutes, like I just kind of let it go that way. There are other interviews where you immediately meet somebody and like it's very concise, or you clearly just do not mix, and those interviews are brief. Like you kind of just have to let it happen.
I think it's really being able to be okay in awkward moments. I have found it's also kind of what I do, but I've found that that's really important. If you have somebody that's coming in and the vibe's not right, like kind of leave that awkward moment dangling and like see what they do next, right? Like just kind of look at them and see what they do. How do they react to an awkward moment? Maybe they even presented, right? And I think people that are good team workers, team members, can usually find a fun way to bounce out of that awkward moment. Or if they kind of lay flat there, like, okay, well, cool. Thanks for coming in. I'll walk you out, right? I think it's important to, like you said, not rush through if it's feeling good. Like I said, if it's an hour and it feels like 20 minutes, chances are they're an awesome person. So either you should definitely be best friends or you should hire them, right? Definitely not both, right? But I think it's a really important factor, because a lot of times I've seen people, even in last jobs, I had coworkers and other managers that they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm hiring. I got 7 interviews today. Like, okay, cool. And then like the day ends, like, yeah, 7 back-to-back hour-long interviews. I'm like, did you like any of them? No. Well, then why the hell weren't they 7, like 10, 15-minute interviews? Why did you make it an hour long? So I think it's important to also like understand, like, look, yeah, you want to be humane in those instances, of course, and you want to represent your core values and who you are. But if it's not a good fit, get it out of there. Just move on. Like, for their sake too, don't waste their time either. Like, your time's valuable, their time's valuable. If it's not a good fit and you're lingering, you're only doing both of you a disservice. But I like that you don't necessarily have like a time limit on it. You kind of let the interviewee and the interview itself kind of lend itself to the timing. I like that.
So,
I dig.
Yeah, when you also mentioned that previously you had only interviewed 1 or 2 people, but then you realized a lot more success happened when you interviewed multiple people for the position. How many people do you typically interview, and when do you know you found the right person?
Ooh, I think generally we interview like maybe 5 to 8 people. That's been the case like the last few positions that we had open. We kind of just figure out who to interview based off of what resumes we receive and kind of who's responding to the post. Like we've been kind of lucky, I guess, through the pandemic, people are looking for jobs like much more than they were beforehand, but we've had good reception from that throughout the last year or so. So
yeah, absolutely. And just going back to like really weighing those, did you guys talk already about the people or the writer thing?
No.
Okay.
We'll get
I don't want to
that.
jump the gun. Yeah, sorry. Just going back to like reevaluating the resume and like the interactions you've had with them before. Do we already know these people? Like, because we are only posting on Instagram, sometimes there are people that have already interacted with us. Are they previous clients, or are they just people we know in the community? And
Is it a friend of a friend?
is it exactly?
Did we get a recommendation from somebody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess if you're looking at their Instagram too, you can just straight up go to look at them and see like what kind of person are they. That's like that's one nice thing. And I've always done that too. I've always done like a Facebook check or an Instagram check, and you can kind of be like, nah, I don't like this person, what they stand for. You can get a lot. I mean, Instagram is their representation of themselves. It's not who they are. It's their representation of themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that
be clear that whenever we say we post on Instagram, we're not receiving Instagram messages about jobs. Like we've actually been very clear about how we want to receive the information and what other information we want them to send us. Kind of following that tour writer, like the brown M&Ms trick, where if we've included very specific details like in the body of the post, and if they don't follow those details, they're automatically out.
I like that reference, the tour writer of making sure you only got the right M&Ms in the bowl. That's what it is. So Tracy, hi Tracy, by the way, she's got a good question. She's asking, do you always check references? That's actually a really good one, because you usually are going to ask for references. Are you calling them? Are you checking them? Is that something that you even care about?
I'm not a big references person, honestly.
No, but we do, like, you know, if we do a little light internet browsing to see if we know these people, you know, if we've got friends in common, or we know that like, hey, so-and-so has collaborated with one of our neighbors before, our business neighbors, you know, we have like hit them up before to be like, hey, what's your experience been like with this person? Do you think they'd be a good fit for us? Tell us a little bit about what you know about them.
It's like the social media background check.
Right.
Where like in this day and age, you can kind of like do a bunch of digging and then find your like friends in common and then like use them as the references. I feel like references can be difficult because either those people are like primed and ready to like give whatever type of review they're expected to give, or they're just gonna slander somebody. Right? So I feel like they can be a little heated.
Yeah. So if we hit up somebody that we do really know and trust, and they happen to have a relationship with this person as well, you can get a really honest bit of feedback. And maybe it's sometimes like, hey, they're amazing and like they're great at what they do, but I don't think they'd be a great fit for you. You know, they're going to be more honest with you, I think, than maybe the references could be.
That's also not to say don't call the references, but like take it with a grain of salt.
I think it's important because I know what you mean. Like they're like primed, ready to go. They get a call like, hey, I'm about to do an interview. Can you make sure you say nice things about me? So I've always been one that I do check references. Jason here from Printavo said always in his opinion check references. I've checked references, but like you said, I only validate that so much, right? If they're like their number one cheerleader, but they're their old boss, I'm going to be like, well, why aren't they there anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you're cheerleading them and they left, why aren't they there? And get a little more information. And if they're like, well, something came up, something happened. I mean, certain laws in certain states are not allowed to say certain things, but I'm still going to kind of get a vibe check on them on that. And then I'm going to bring it up in the interview. Be like, oh, I did a reference and your old boss is a little bit hesitant to say some things. You want to give me some info? And how they respond to that too. If they're like, oh yeah, well, my boss was a jerk. I found that if everyone says, oh, all my old bosses were jerks, turns out they're the jerk, not the bosses, right? Like, well, the similar variable is you between all those shops, so maybe we got to look inside first. But I think it's important to, like you said, do a check. I think a social media check, honestly, is so massive. It's also terrifying to think about, like, all the things that you can get turned up on yourself from 20 years ago, right? But I think it's really, really important to kind of do, like, with a grain of salt, like you said, a reference check, and then a grain of salt, a bit too, on a social media check to kind of get an idea of, like, who do they think they are? What do people around them think of them? And then figure out, at the last instance, what do I think after my interaction with them? Because I think it's not fair to go just off of a reference or off of a wishy-washy social media post, right?
Exactly. It's all, like you said, with a grain of salt. And, like, circling back to kind of the brown M&M thing, if all of these other things check out and the, you know, references are great, whatever, if they can't follow this, like, simple instruction or request from us of, like, hey, you know, on the last round, it was, we wanted them to include what they've been listening to lately. So if they didn't do the simple thing of, like, hey, these are the 5 albums I've been rocking with, you know, it's a red flag immediately that they're not detail oriented and following those smaller instructions. So it eliminates them right off the bat. So it's been
such a genius low-hanging fruit idea that is really well thought out, because they have to give you an answer and you get to know a little more about who they are when they give the answer.
Yeah, and it really does, like, spark the interview process, like, in a really nice way, because then you could be like, oh my gosh, you love Frank Ocean too, you know, so you can, like, get on.
Well, who doesn't?
It's an amazing ice cream.
Yeah.
That's what. So Tracy mentioned that they're not permitted to give opinions. So that's a lot of states. That's the thing is, bosses are only allowed to verify that they were employed. A lot of places you can't actually give information. So oftentimes, if it's a former, like, employer as a reference, I will oftentimes skip that too. I want to know more, like, what was, like, their coworker at their last place, because they're more likely to be like, yeah, no, I worked with him. He was a jerk. I'd be like, oh, why'd you use them as a reference? That's terrible. I think you get a little more candid than the boss is afraid of being like, look, I'm happy you're working somewhere else. I'm going to say nice things because you're gone, right? So it's already there. That reference is a little bit wishy-washy. Jason mentions that he asks hyper-specific questions for reference checks, aligns the answers from the candidate, and figure out what actually happened. So definitely doing a little bit of fact-finding and comparing notes is important. But what we're getting at is that it is a process. It has to be a process. And that's where it comes back full circle of, like, yeah, you found good ways and good processes to actually go into those things and figure it out. So when you do the 5 to 8, if you do 5 to 8 and you haven't found the person yet, do you recheck your process and question, okay, is our process right? Or do you say, okay, we've got 5 to 8, just not good fits, and we keep going? What do you do with that instance?
I mean,
That's a great question.
Again, I think we've been lucky in that we've found people within those 5 to 8. But if that were to happen, I think in the future, I would leave the application process open and, like, see if we get more people instead of potentially, like, settling for somebody who we weren't, like, over the moon for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if it were a situation where we weren't necessarily trying to fill an immediate
like, it's not
vacancy.
dire.
Yeah, if it was something that was more of a I feel like we lost both of you.
We can see you. We can hear you.
Perfect. Keep going.
Yeah, if it is a hire that was more like, this is something we've determined to be where it's kind of a bottlenecking is happening in the company and we're needing another team member, and not like somebody has left or terminated and we need to replace them immediately, we can definitely take our time with extending that application process.
Got it. That's good. We can still see you and hear you, by the way. So if we're missing, just pretend we're still there. Hold up 2 mops and talk to 2 mops. We're just pretend.
I had our next question, but that one last thought on the references. I really do think Tracy is onto something here, that you're not in a lot of states, not just Tracy states, but in a great many states, you probably are not going to get the most honest responses from a former employer. So I think what everyone was saying on the call to maybe take to heart is look at their social media And keep in mind that a reference is also incentivized to lie. So they might not be telling you the truth. The candidate is probably going to tell you more truth than the reference, in my experience.
For sure. And I think Jason is on to something to where you should use the reference to back up like something that you're questioning too. I think if I had an instance where we were interviewing somebody and it just wasn't congruent from what they said to something that we saw on social media or something that one of our, like little sneaky references has told us, I would call their references and figure out if that's actually true.
Absolutely. It can be a great like backup, a reserved option.
Yeah.
And I would also say if we were ever to a situation where like we really could only hire one person for one position, but we were battling it out between a couple candidates that we really loved, and we weren't in the situation where we're able to create a new position for them, that could be another way.
Like kind of the icebreaker.
Yeah, totally. Where we can bring those resources in at that point.
Yeah.
So last question, well, maybe not, but one more question I've got is when you are hiring, what is more important to you? Is it aptitude or is it actual ability for what you're trying to hire for? So if you're trying to hire maybe an ink mixer, right, or something along those lines, do you need somebody that has color theory background? Do you need someone that has done that recently or previously at all? Or are you looking more for aptitude and just like a vibe check, like making sure like, hey, you're intelligent, you can learn things and you're cool. Let's start there. Or is it more important to you to kind of find a middle ground between those? Or is it something you even pay attention to?
I think we've had a lot of success in hiring for the specific people, the aptitude aspect where we know that this person fits within our core values. We know that they have an interest or a passion in whatever the position is, and we know that they're teachable and they're willing to learn. I think that in general is more successful than hiring somebody who has like the pre-existing skill set that we're looking for, just because we want somebody who will want to grow and learn with us instead of somebody who maybe necessarily has like habits from another job, or they only know this one specific thing, but they're not willing to like, expand upon their knowledge or experiment.
Exactly. If sometimes you get into a situation where it's like you can't teach an old horse new tricks, and we want to make sure that at all times all of our team members are very teachable and really excited and enthusiastic about learning new things. And so I think that like enthusiasm and passion is something that you can't teach. And so if they come and they're like, I'm so amped to be here and to work specifically for our company, then that's something that you're able to, color theory is a little bit more specific because like we're not going to hire somebody who's colorblind, for example. That would be the goal. And of course, color theory is something that is teachable, but it is very, that's a pretty specific thing that, I would look for hopefully somebody who's got a history with color theory, but in terms of like, nailing down that position even further, if you've got a person that's super passionate and
they're going to want to learn all of the nitty gritty details about it if they're passionate about it. So,
yeah.
I mean, when we were hiring a sales rep, we were really interested in somebody who had a lot of charisma and wanted to talk to people like a people person, because you can't really teach somebody to be that person, but you can teach them all of the details about screen printing or what they need to know to price out jobs.
Yeah. So that was a fun one because we hadn't really approached that position from that direction before. So each time we're hiring again, or for, like either for a similar position, hiring it again, and also for just each new hire, kind of reevaluating how we're thinking about that each time has been really beneficial.
So when you guys hire someone, it doesn't sound like that's the end. How do you guys train that new employee and onboard them into the organization?
So training is also an ongoing process that we are refining always.
Yes.
I have been writing like an employee guide of kind of our standard operating processes for the last like 5 years. It now lives in a Google Doc, so everybody can like look at it. And I'm not like precious about sitting here like trying to make sure it's like perfect before everybody sees it. But everybody gets one of those. That's kind of their reference to things that we've developed already. This last round of hires for our sales rep, Krista and I actually sat down and we developed like the whole week's schedule for them, kind of starting from Monday being like a broad overview, like who's Flash Flood, like what is our company culture like, what's our ordering process like, so that as they go through the rest of the week, each day is like further refined and further focused on their position. So you start broad and then just like narrow down.
Yeah. And I will say, I think this last round of training has been our most successful yet, because we're getting to be better teachers ourselves, and we're also getting better about all of those specific details. And also like thinking back to when like I was in that position, when I was the salesperson, and like what were things that I wished would have been a part of my training, and how can I make sure that this new person has an experience that's maybe a little bit smoother than that one, you know, and like what were specific details, you know, because you can't learn everything all right away. You know, there's so many specific, very, very specific situations that come up in this industry.
Yeah.
That you know, you can't just learn it in one day or even in 1 week. So making sure we have that one block of time that we're super dedicated to it, and then staying really flexible ourselves so that we're able to kind of do ongoing training, that each time one of these new situations pops up that is like really unique and something that couldn't necessarily be easily written in the employee hand guide, we can make sure that we're there to help coach through that situation as well.
I think we've also been really aware of how different people learn and have been adapting the way that we teach to how they learn. Like, I love to see things written out. So like, that's why the employee guide works for me, and like why I output all of my information that way. We have a lot of people that will only be able to learn just from like doing repeatedly. So we try to like adapt the way that we've been teaching to fit their way of learning, essentially.
Which is actually something that we have started including in the interview process too. Asking them like straight out, like, how do you learn? What is the best way for you to retain information?
Yeah. Would you rather watch a video, or do you want to read like step-by-step instructions? Like what works?
Yeah, and also following that up, like, how do you receive feedback? What is the most constructive way for you to receive information that's like meant to be a teaching tool, you know? So getting those questions out of the way early, and like letting people know also that this is like a moldable process, that we're like trying to make it as beneficial for them as well. I think that helps like kind of soften all of those edges.
That's awesome. So you just struck gold with some things right there that I want to make sure people are fully taking in. Is people learn differently, right? So what I did in college, instructional design, is really the psychology of learning. And everyone learns different. Just because two people do the same thing and one retains it, one doesn't mean one's dumb. It just means that learning method was not effective for that educational type. So I think that you coming up front and asking, what is the best way for you to learn? People usually know the answer to that. Like, well, I watch a lot of YouTube videos, or honestly, I got to do something 3 times before I finally get it. Like, those are all okay answers. And it's really, really awesome that you are ahead of that and asking them, how do you learn? What's the best way for you to learn? And then you're adapting your training methodology to meet those needs, as well as figuring out what is the best way for them to receive feedback. Some people might want it in written. They might want to have a discussion with you. They might want to be shown again in person. And if you do it the wrong way, it can actually be offensive to them. And it can kind of shutter them a little bit to being less open. So one question that leads me into is, how frequently or are you doing one-on-one check-ins? How does that go after you bring them in? What is that continued? We know we got the little passport thing where you figure out like, hey, 1 to 5, what do you like about the departments? But how often are you actually engaging in one-to-ones, and do you do that?
So I think in general, we're also developing this a little bit each time. We are now trying to really strictly adhere to quarterly reviews for all team members. But I think in the very beginning, when somebody is being trained, we've made like a little booklet for some of the production roles where each week or each day of the week, they're focusing on like one specific task, and they're actually being reviewed on that task by like a supervisor or somebody who's been in that role previously every day, so that it's kind of like reiterating like what happens in the process, and if there's something that they're not sure of or if they're doing wrong, like it gets addressed like pretty quickly and reinforced fairly quickly.
Absolutely. And I think that that's been really helpful, but it is a new addition to our training process. So it's definitely still like in refinement. But that in conjunction with the quarterly reviews, I think are super helpful as like dedicated times for discussing these things, but also keeping like a very open door policy where if something needs to be discussed and it's in between one of these quarterly, discussions, we're still going to go ahead and have that talk at that time.
There's no need to be so formal and that we have to wait until the quarterly review. It's
exactly.
Like, okay, let's sit down and talk about this, or like, I can see that you're maybe struggling in this area. Let's go through a refresher, or like, how are you feeling about this?
Yeah. But you also mentioned like sometimes offering a bit of feedback can come off or can be received in an offensive way. And we definitely have had a scenario where like we noticed that there was a struggle happening and offered additional training, but the way it was presented and received did not go well. So that was like a great learning experience for us as well, because the way we were presenting that did not align with the way that particular person receives feedback. So making sure that we're aware of that, and then like making it most comfortable. At the end of the day, it is all still business, so you can't necessarily bend over backwards for every single person. But we find that like trying to keep all of that stuff in mind is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Great response. Love it.
That segues good to our next one. You can't always make every hire work out. Sometimes it does work out. What have you guys ever needed to, kind of go back against that decision, fire somebody, and what gives you that? What tells you need to do that? How do you know when it's not a good fit?
That I also think is something that we've gotten better with every single time. I think we are much more likely to address the problems earlier on in the lifespan of this person's like position with us than we have been in the past, where we've been like kind of wishy-washy about like having those honest discussions pretty early on. But I think now, whenever we're noticing that somebody has consistently been falling short, we'll pull them aside and have this discussion with them. And I've actually started writing out the points that we would like to see like improvement on, and kind of giving them like a time period with which to like improve on those points. And then we, kind of review it again with them at that time.
Yeah, because if initially we weren't great at being super specific about what exactly the issue was. And so what May's speaking about, giving them a written document of expectations, if they are not able within that reasonable time frame to show at least an attempt, or that they're trying to improve on this, it's pretty clear at that point that like this isn't going to work out, and then going back to the core values as well. If they're no longer fitting within the core values and they're also not performing, it's like that makes that decision pretty clear.
My experience is that shops tend to be too far on one side. They tend to either fire way too fast or they don't fire fast enough. I think that you can be too far left or right in that instance as well. But I think that what you just said there at the end of those values, again, having a good laid out core value is really imperative, because honestly, if someone breaks a core value right there, they're clearly showing they're in violation of the core values. In that instance, I would say that is an immediate, right? That's okay, well, this is, and that is why it's helpful to have the core values, because you can now pull your emotion out. You feel for them. They've got their needs. They've got the support people, right? But if they're breaking the core values, that's where it's so imperative to have it, because you can take yourself out of it and go, well, you broke the core value. Sorry. I'm sorry you did that to us too. You got to go, right? I think that's it's so important to have that, because that's how you know if you're in the right or wrong of letting somebody go, because they can just upset you or kind of get your blood boiling, and then you react emotionally, and then that sucks. And then the other coworkers or employees or staff are going to see that as well, and they're going to question you. Where the same thing can happen where if they break those core values and you don't let them go and you're not swift about it, they're going to see that too, and they're going to question your validity and the values validity and what you're actually there as a leader to support them in. So I think it's firing is one of those things where it's uncomfortable. No one likes to do it. Hopefully no one's good at it. It's not something you should practice to be good at. But it is something it's really, really valuable to understand when you have to be swift and when you have to be candid with some compassion and just take care of business. And I think that bringing it back to the top of those core values is exactly how you do that.
Yeah, and nobody needs to be in a place, like nobody benefits from being here longer. Like we would benefit from understanding and knowing when to fire somebody, like in a timely way, and they would benefit from it too, because it's clearly not a good fit.
Exactly. Like you mentioned earlier about even their interviews, if you know in those 10 minutes that it's not going to be a great fit, why go for a full hour? If we're struggling with a team member and they're clearly struggling as well,
and they've repeatedly not been making efforts to make it better or to improve, then it's better for both of us if we find somebody or someplace else to work.
Yeah. Thankfully, we haven't had to do it very often.
Yeah.
But also,
I think your process has helped lead to not having people come in that you're going to have to do that with. So I think you're ahead of it, which is why you haven't had it so much, which is a great example of why everyone else should follow your lead and get a good process together and implement these things, because it will save you from those awkward, uncomfortable moments of having to terminate people and then restructure and rebuild your team.
Yeah,
absolutely. We're looking for longevity. We're looking for happy team members that are passionate about being here and love the work they're doing and love the team that they're a part of.
Yeah, so, and that want to grow with us.
Yeah, exactly. They see the potential and they're excited about that. So hopefully that all kind of circumvents that situation.
Yeah.
Yes, and kind of bringing us back to the start. We've been talking about this as a process, and you've mentioned numerous times that it's something you've gotten better at over time. What are some of the indicators that you're getting better at it, and what are some of the indicators that you're getting worse? I mean, I guess I can think of an obvious one: the team's growing. But what are some of the ways you're able to evaluate and say, "Hey, this is getting better. Hey, we're learning." What are some of those clues for?
I think having the training go better, just having people that experience go smoothly, I think has helped a lot, and has been a good indicator that we're kind of on the right path. Gosh, that is a tough one.
That is hard. I mean, I think that if we got to a point where it felt like it clearly wasn't working anymore, we're pretty quick to self-evaluate, and if we need to pivot, we're ready to pivot. We try not to spend too long dwelling in a process that no longer is going to serve us. So, I think if we went through an interview session, we got through 8 candidates, it didn't work, we continue the application period and we still don't find anybody, I think
that's the time for us to self-evaluate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think you also nailed it too, Nick. If you've got people that are sustainable, they're hanging around, you don't have a lot of turnover, and culture and core values are being held up as the platform what it needs to be, I think that means you got a good process. I think if you start finding that there are continuous milestones that are failing, or turnover, or any toxicity, that means it's not as good as it needs to be, and you need to keep working on it. And I think that May and Krista, you kind of said a couple of things here that are important, that you're willing to adapt and evolve. You're not going to go against your core values, but you're going to also let those evolve as you evolve too. So not being so hard-nosed that you're setting things in stone, and then you have to live by archaic rules that may not fit for who you are anymore because you developed these 3-4 years ago, right? So being pliable, being open, being fluid in those instances while maintaining who you are and what you stand for is what we're seeing here today. I think this is why Flash Flood Print is having such success, because they're continuously evolving and doing the best they can with who they have, while and being inclusive, understanding, and building better processes. So I love it. Love it. Awesome.
Absolutely. Any last minute thought, ladies? Anything we want to share that we didn't hit on?
I think we covered a lot of what we had wanted to talk about. We covered it all. There's always something. But.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just like making sure you're talking to your current team about, about everything, and making sure that like everybody is feeling important and valued, and all of that is going to lead to us being more informed in terms of who else we're looking for. So yeah, just open.
I think we're really good at talking to the rest of the team and trying to make sure that everybody's really involved in like the big decisions that are happening. Like, honestly, I'm not perfect. Like sometimes things will happen where like I need to make a decision really quickly, but I feel like we've kept everybody fairly well informed about any changes that are happening, and trying to just get better at that, like as we go on, and just having like an open and honest talk.
Yeah, and never thinking that anything's in stone or we're like finished with the process. Like we also talk about that in the interview process as well with the candidates, about being honest about like these are ongoing being developed consistently. Like your position, we're going to be able to get better at refining it once we've got somebody in that role, and so setting an expectation of evolution from the beginning, so everybody knows that there's going to be like growth always. Yeah.
And transparency. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Couldn't agree more.
So cool. Yeah, this sounds like a ton of great information. Folks, you can rewatch this if you're hiring in a couple of weeks here, or if you're hiring in a month. We'll have it on this link and on YouTube. We do these Printavo University webinars every other Thursday. We have another one coming up in just a couple of weeks, just 2 weeks here. We're going to be talking about running meetings and running effective team meetings. So very similar topic. And then, yes, so one last thing I wanted to mention, May and Krista, thank you so much. They were mentioning Instagram. Go follow them right now. It's Flash Flood Print. Super easy. Spell it all. And then, go give them a follow. But otherwise, thank you all for watching. It has been great. A lot to learn. And we will be seeing you again real soon. So
May and Krista, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure getting to speak with you. I'm excited to keep learning more from you folks as you keep going. Thank you guys so much for sharing.
Thanks. You all.
All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. See you soon.
Bye, guys.